Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Eric. Today I'm going to be starting a series of videos talking about Richard Matheson, the famed horror sci-fi writer of the mid-late 20th century. This is one of my favorite short story collections, the best of Richard Matheson that Penguin put out several years ago. And yeah, I just thought I would go through, kind of just talk about each story, every story. I want to go through every story, just talk about each story, but also talk about some of the adaptations of these stories as well. So it's a good way to lead into some of the TV and movie adaptations. Yeah, just a little bit of background on Richard Matheson. So he wrote in many genres. I've not read his westerns, but I've heard his westerns are quite good. But he wrote science fiction, he wrote horror, he wrote mysteries, he wrote thrillers. So often grouped, I believe, with other California writers like Ray Bradbury and Charles Beaumont, another one. I might be talking more about Beaumont at some point. But this kind of coterie of California writers who wrote in genre. They wrote a lot for television. Matheson wrote for TV a lot and movies. So, but they were really leaving a big mark, really shaping the imagination of future generations. Like there are blurbs in the back. Stephen King has a blurb. I think Matheson is definitely a precursor to Stephen King. King has said that himself many times. Even Steven Spielberg, Matheson has been a big influence on Spielberg. Spielberg's first film, Duel, was an adaptation of a Matheson story. So he's, in looking at pop culture, American pop culture, Matheson is really a pivotal figure in really shaping the imagination of pop culture. So that's one reason I want to talk about it. The horror writer Victor Laval wrote the introduction for this. It's a really fantastic introduction. Talks about the influence of Matheson and how powerful so many of his stories are, and they continue to have influence into the 21st century. So yeah, I think with that I'm going to talk about a couple stories today, and yeah, so why not to get started. So I'll try to avoid spoilers when I talk about these. If I can get through it without spoiling, I will. If I feel like I need to spoil it, that's fine too. So hopefully that's not an issue. But anyway, the first story in this collection is Born of Man and Woman. This is a very short one. This is only 4 or 5 pages. It's a first-person story. It's told from the perspective of someone who is locked up in an attic, chained to an attic. They can only watch the world from a small window. We get the sense that this being, well, I think it's a human being, but we're not 100% sure. Either it's a human being who is deformed in some way. It could be a mutant. It could be a monster. I'll talk about that too. But basically, there's a husband and wife that we know that feed this narrator and take care of it on a very basic level. But they're also very cruel towards it, right? So it has this really awful existence, and that's really the story. It's really about, I think, sympathy for the monster is a big theme in the story, because we see how badly the narrator is mistreated, and how it is, the narrator wants to experience the world, is very curious about the world, and is just treated horribly. But we can also see a big rage beginning to surface. So it's also a story about how monsters are born, from horrible mistreatment and horrible rejection. So it's just a really kind of a basic primal story about the birth of monsters, or even why human beings can become monstrous. So it's just it's a good starter for the book, because it sets up a lot of themes about when we talk about horror stories specifically, what are always the underpinning themes, and I think the story really does that well. I could think of a few things I see maybe influenced by the story. There's a Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode, I believe, called "The Thing and I," which the premise is that Bart was actually a Siamese twin, and there's actually an evil version of Bart who's locked up in the attic and is horribly mistreated by Homer and Marge, and of course Bart discovers that he had this twin. So I don't know if that was directly influenced by the Matheson story, but made me think about it. Also, Stephen King's Pet Sematary. There's a subplot in that book with Louis Creed's his wife has a backstory where her sister was had a severe medical condition and was deformed and was horribly mistreated by her family, and the more she was mistreated, the more monstrous she became. So, like I said, I don't know if they're directly influenced by the story, but those definitely came to mind as I was reading Born of Man and Woman. So, like I said, very short but very effective. So the next story I'll talk about is Prey, the title you can see there. So in this story, we follow Amelia is the protagonist of the story. She's a young woman, 33 years old. I guess she's just started living in her new apartment. She's been living with her mom for most of her life, and we can see early on, it's like a Friday night. She's got home from work. She's planning to meet her partner, her boyfriend. It's his birthday, and she bought a birthday gift for him. This little figure, a Zuni warrior, okay, which plays a big role in the story. Meanwhile, she gets a phone call from her mom, who is pressuring Amelia to come visit her tonight, and we can see how controlling her mother is, not letting her be an adult, like, I don't like you out seeing men. You need to be with me. You need to come see me 3 or 4 times a week because all I've done for you, and so it's just a very manipulative, controlling relationship. And so Amelia decides to cancel her plans with I think the guy's name here, Arthur is the guy's name. He doesn't take it so well. He kind of says, "You do whatever your mom says. I don't know how we can even have a relationship if you're just jumping whenever she yells jump." So we can see how Amelia's getting it from a lot of sides. From her mom, Arthur isn't so nice to her either. And then we have the Zuni warrior comes alive, okay? And this thing, I don't know. I'll talk about the movie version of this, but it's maybe 2 feet tall, and it has a spear, and it can move. And suddenly, she's under attack by the Zuni warrior, where it cuts her legs up bad, and she has to fight back. And the whole story becomes this really battle to the death between Amelia and the little figurine that's come alive. Matheson is really good at writing action. That's one thing I noticed with him. Some writers, when they're writing like about fights or any kind of action scenario, it can be clunky. But Matheson he's really cinematic in his approach. He really keeps it going where you have a clear picture in your head of what's happening, and it's just really good action prose. So that's the story of. Now we can talk. I think the Zuni warrior, whether that is a metaphor of control and how Amelia is being controlled by people in her life, and she has to find a way to stand up for herself, which she's put in a situation where there's there's no psychological games being played. She has to get out of this situation and defeat this threat. So reading the story on that level as about the toy symbolizing, or the doll symbolizing the forces in her life, keeping her down, but it has a great ending. The image at the ending is really good, and actually kind of a haunting ending, which is cool. So this was made into a short film, famously called The Trilogy of Terror, which aired in the 70s. I want to say 1975 for TV. Matheson, I believe, adapted 3 of his short stories for a TV special, and Prey was one of them. Karen Black gives a really good performance, in that film that's very faithful to the short story, and probably the generation that grew up will remember that. I don't know how well remembered that is today, the Trilogy of Terror, but I know for a certain generation you hear it referenced a lot where people remember that one. So Prey's great. Prey's also a really memorable story. So let's see, the third one on here, lost my place. Let's see, which is, okay, Witch War. This is one of my favorites in the collection. This is another one that's very short. It's only like 4 or 5 pages, and it's one of the more surreal stories in this collection, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of dark. We start out, we're just like with this group of like little girls or young teenagers. We never get their specific age, and they're getting ready to go out. They're jump roping, and they're getting ready to go out and have a day. And meanwhile, we shift to this war, this battle, massive battle that's about to take place. And then we learn that these little girls are basically manipulating this battle. They're like these puppet masters who, for their own amusement, and we get these vivid descriptions of like this massive battle where men are killing themselves by the thousands, blowing each other up, shooting each other, and these girls are just watching this and giggling and having a good old time watching this. And that's the story, really. That's the image in the story, and there's a great contrast between the world of these girls and the brutal war that Matheson is describing. And I think it's the story is very it's one of those stories where you can put a lot of interesting meanings on it, I think, where it's about these massive battles, and it does make you ask questions like, why do World War One, World War Two, why did these massive battles happen? These just, and if you really do think about it, thousands of soldiers just destroying each other, slaughtering each other, it just seems like total madness. And how would a child look at that? Okay, and to the girls, it's for their own amusement. They find it hilarious that this is how men behave, right? This is how they do what they do to each other. So there's just a really something in the story about fighting and war and men, and so but there's also this kind of surreal, mystical side to it as well. It's a hard story to talk about. It's such a the concept of the story is so visceral and mysterious as to what's going on, but I really do think ultimately it's just about the absurdity of war and how it looks like, what it looks like to an outsider, and like I said, the great contrast of the girls just having a fun day and the men destroying each other it's memorable. So I'm a big fan of that story, and it's always worth a read. Okay, so last one I'll talk about today will be Shipshape Home, is the title here. And this is about a young couple, newlywed couple, New York City. They've moved into a new apartment. And apartment, horror becomes a big part of like the 50s, 60s, up to today even. There's so many great horror films, Rosemary's Baby, or could name many others, that are set in the apartment. So this is really a story about the anxiety of living in a building with other people, living with seeing suspicious things and wondering what's going on. Also in here about, I think, living in the city and the anxieties that come with that. But anyway, the main couple in the story is Ruth, is the main character, and she's telling her husband that she's noticing all these strange things. The janitor in particular, who she says looks like Peter Lorre, and that she says, his movements are strange. he's always like kind of walking around checking everyone out, and she's like, I don't know, she's like, I don't trust this guy. There's just something about this janitor. And of course her husband plays her off like he's just doing his job, I'm sorry, he doesn't act the way you like, but come on, he's not bothering anybody. Well, she kind of persists with it. She's saying there's something going on, and and they do discover that something is going on in the basement of the story. And it's one of those where you think the one character thinks the other character's crazy, that they're seeing things, kind of a gaslight type of situation, and tells her, you're just imagining this, it's all in your head, you need to occupy your mind with other things. But what if that person's right? So this story, it's more satire almost. I think the ending's kind of comical with this one from Matheson. As far as how it ends, it kind of goes in this kind of fun, fantastical direction. So this was adapted in the 50s into a TV. I think it in a live TV show. So it aired in the 1950s. I know it's on YouTube. I believe you can find it. I've watched it before. And I believe in this live TV special, Peter Lorre actually plays the janitor, which was a nice touch. So yeah, so Shipshape Home, classic Matheson story. So anyway, those are the four. I'll come back. I'll talk about a couple more next time. Yeah, so hope you enjoyed this. If you have any favorite Matheson stories or adaptations or just thoughts overall on Matheson's influence on the horror genre, sci-fi genre, yeah, it'd be great to hear them. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.